Hi everybody, this is Laura with Crazy Cool Cakes. I'm coming to you with another cool tutorial, and this one is going to be about how to cover styrofoam dummy cakes with fondant. So here I have a two-tiered cake that's already been stacked, and these are, believe it or not, styrofoam. I'm going to be showing you guys how to panel styrofoam cakes. It's very easy to do, and this is a really cool way to practice your covering of cakes with fondant. And also, if you don't have any current cake orders but you want to practice your decorating, this is a really cool thing to do too. So you can make yourself a bunch of two-tier dummy cakes and you can practice your cake decorating or your cake painting. So I'm actually getting ready for one of my classes, and I took advantage and went ahead and shot a tutorial while I was covering my dummy cakes with fondant. So hope you guys like it, and let's go ahead and get started. So these are the materials that we're gonna need. You're gonna of course need a styrofoam dummy. Right now I'm going to demonstrate how to cover this 6-inch round cake dummy, and they sell different types of styrofoam. This type has a lot of texture on it, and I'm sure you can find some online that are a lot smoother than this. Okay, you'll need for rolling out your fondant some cornstarch or powdered sugar. You'll need your rolling pin, a wet semi-damp rag, mine's all red because I've been using it all day, pizza cutter. You'll need a fondant smoother. Okay, you may or may not need a little spray bottle of water. I like to spray my fondant when it starts to dry up on me a little bit. You will need a long blade, and you can find these in the sculpting aisle at any Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Joann's if you have one in your city. And then quite possibly a bench scraper for just slicing up your fondant if you need to. You're also going to need just a little paintbrush, little tiny bit of water. You can use any type of shortening. I like to use just the generic Great Value brand from Walmart, and a paper towel if you don't want to get shortening all over your surface area. Okay guys, so we're gonna get started. The first thing I'm gonna do is take a little bit of fondant, and I like to actually cut the fondant that's going to be covering the top of my dummy. And for this I need very little because it's a little 6-inch, so I don't need that much. Okay, now because this styrofoam is somewhat textured, I like my fondant to be just a little bit thick. That way I don't risk any of the texture on the styrofoam coming through the fondant. So this is, I would say, only about a little less than an ounce of fondant. You can determine for yourself how much you'll want to use depending on what type of or what size of styrofoam dummy you're using. Alright, so I'm just going to roll this out. Just to where I know it's going to cover the top of my 6-inch. And at this point I want to spray a little bit of, or dust a little bit of cornstarch so it doesn't stick. Any powdered sugar or cornstarch stains, I'm not worried about at all because I'm going to get rid of all of this once I've stacked my cake dummies, and my husband will be steaming the entire cake. So any cornstarch stains or powdered sugar will disappear completely, and the steaming actually gives the cake a really nice shine, makes it look very clean. Okay, so as you can see, it's really not thick at all, maybe just a little over 1/8 of an inch, or maybe just at 1/8 of an inch. So what I like to do is, this is going to be the top here, so I'm going to flip this over, and I'm just going to put this on top, and then I just take my pizza cutter and I'm just going to cut around. And you want to give yourself more than enough, because we will be cutting this with a blade once it's on there. Okay, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Right now we're just making sure that we're going to have more than enough fondant. I have a piece of foam core here. It doesn't have to be foam core, you can use anything at all. And I have some wax paper. And I would recommend using wax paper because we are going to stick this in the freezer for a few minutes while we are covering the rest of our dummy. Alright guys, so I have enough fondant here to roll out a long piece of fondant to cover my sides of my styrofoam. We know that the circumference of this cake tier is going to be at least 24 inches. Okay, so what I love about this silicone mat is I can actually see the measurements on my table, so I'll know exactly how long to roll out my fondant. And then I also know that this styrofoam is 4 inches tall. Okay, so I know that it would have to be at least 4 inches tall. So I'm just gonna roll out this long strip of fondant, and it's gonna be the same thickness as the top, the circle that we cut a little while ago. Okay, so I have my fondant rolled out to approximately 26 inches. I always like to go just a little bit over. It's better to have a little more than what you need than not enough. Then I take my pizza cutter because I like to have my edges, you know, straight as possible, even though I am going to end up trimming these edges off. I just like to work with the minimum amount of fondant so that it's not too heavy and it doesn't get in my way. So like I said, I know that my styrofoam dummy is 4 inches tall. So I know about 4 inches is about this length here. So I just like to use my finger as a guide, and I just keep my hand in place. Then what I'm going to do is to make sure that my fondant is going to stick to my styrofoam is right now I'm only going to add shortening to the sides of my cake dummy. So I just grab a clump of shortening and I smear it on my hands. And I just smear it on the sides. And believe it or not, this is all you need to stick fondant to styrofoam is just some shortening. And it is, I wouldn't say messy. I mean, you do get this stuff all over your hands, but no big deal. Have some paper towels handy, that way you can just wipe your hands right afterwards. You don't want to get any on the top right now. If you do accidentally, no big deal. Then I pick it up and I just do this all the way around to make sure that I've covered the entire side of the cake dummy. You can see I paid $2.99 for this dummy at our cake supply. Okay, so I've got my paper towel. I'm just gonna wipe my hands real quick. Okie dokie. Put my rolling pin right smack in the middle. Lift this over. Then I get my cake dummy and I put it right there. Lift my fondant and just place it over my dummy. Okay, and I lift it up. If you saw what I did is I put this piece of fondant underneath, okay? And I can see that I have all of this excess, so this is where I'm going to use my blade. And if you can see here from the side, I know exactly where I need to cut. So all of this is excess, okay? And basically you just smooth it over. Don't press too hard, and just enough to lift it. Okay, so at this point is I like to get my smoother here and just start smoothing the fondant and holding this piece so that it doesn't fall off the side of the dummy. Okay, so for the seam, I'm going to just gently lift this part over. I want to make sure that this line is perfectly straight, and I see that it's not. So what I do is I take my blade and I'm just going to cut a perfectly straight line. And this is extra, I can get rid of this here. Okay, then I place this back over gently with my finger so I can see the line where the seam is. Okay, I actually take my smoother and just gently press up against that line so you can actually see where the seam is. Okay, then I take my blade and I just place it right next to that line. Okay, to make the cut all the way through from this fondant that's hanging over, I like to cut to the side, and I do the same thing over here so I can get rid of this extra. Now if you have a little tiny gap, this will always happen, no big deal. All I do is just gently use the palms of my hand and I just gently push it together. Okay, then you can just use your fingers and just gently, without denting the fondant, just kind of press it together. And then just smooth it over. Okay, so now what I do is take my fondant smoother and just start gently smoothing the fondant onto the styrofoam. And again, all of these cornstarch or powdered sugar stains, or even shortening stains, because I still have a little bit of shortening on my hands, is not a big deal, because I'm going to steam my cake and that'll take care of that for me. What I also like to do is take my smoother and just at a very tiny slight angle, instead of being perfectly straight like this, at a tiny angle, I like to just go over the edge so that I can actually see the edge, and that way I know the fondant is stuck to the styrofoam even up to the edge. Okay, I'm going to flip it over and do the same to the other side. And all of this time, the circle that we cut a while ago is still in the freezer. Okay. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just wipe my table down, because I don't want any tiny little pieces of cornstarch or fondant getting on my styrofoam here. Okay. So the purpose of this wet cloth is just to make sure that you are able to clean your blade. You want to have a nice clean blade every single time you use it, so it's nice and sharp. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is trim off the excess off the sides of my cake dummy. So I start by just pushing this little flap down. The first initial cut, it doesn't have to be perfect, okay? And you want to hold your blade like this, and I just make that first cut. Now here, if you notice, my blade is completely flush with the side of the styrofoam cake dummy. So what I'm going to do is you just hold it flush and you just turn the styrofoam and you are cutting. Okay, and you can see how easily that comes off. Okay, now you can see that it's not absolutely perfect. What I like to do again is take my smoother one more time and at a very slight angle press the fondant up against the styrofoam to make sure that it's stuck. And we can see that we have a tiny little bit of overhang. So I'm going to wipe my blade and once again make sure it's nice and clean so that it's nice and sharp. And I just again place it, and any little tiny things I see hanging over, I'm just going to slice right off. This is actually pretty easy. I mean, it just takes a little bit of patience. Any little pieces that look like they want to lift, just press them right back down. Okay. And then I just like to smooth my thumb over it. Make sure there's no little tiny little pieces of fondant sticking up. Okay. Smoothing it with my palm. Okay, so there's one side. Now I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. Get rid of all my little extra pieces so that they're not in the way. And once again, I'm going to cut clean my blade. Okay, so here's my seam. I just press this part down. Stick my blade in there. Okay, you can see the blade is completely flat, flush up against the styrofoam. And then just as you are holding your styrofoam so it doesn't get away from you, just turn it. Slightly turn. And cut all this off. When you get to the edge here, hold it in place. Okay. Once again, at a slight angle with a smoother, just to make sure that the edges are completely up against and stuck to the styrofoam. And then we'll check to see if we have any little overhang that we need to trim off. Okay. So here I see just a tiny little bit that needs to come off.